Kyriacou, and I'm a broadcast motion designer and a 3D artist. I work for the BBC in London, and I've been working in the industry for 21 years. I've been at the BBC for nearly 20 years. I design anything from opening titles to content graphics to 3D explainers, 2D explainers. I've done infographics. I've worked on documentaries, a variety of other genres, from news to non-news, and audiences, from adults to children's television. And Cinema 4D I've been using for 18 of those years. So that's quite a long time. And I've seen it develop a lot over the years. And for me, it's one of my favorite applications and an important application that I use. And it features quite a lot within my workflow. The first project that I worked on in Cinema 4D was the Liquid News opening titles. And that was a 3-month project. And that was about 18 years ago. And I pretty much learned it on the job. And ever since then, I was pretty much hooked. Just thought I'd kick off with my current reel. And then I'll take a sequence that features within the reel. And I'll just do a little breakdown of it. So here it is. Can't hear the audio. So there you go. That's my current reel. The sequence that I'm going to do a little kind of conceptual and technical breakdown is BBC School Report. I was commissioned this kind of around March this year. But what I've done is I've put together a little making of reel, just to give you an idea of the kind of workflow and the kind of pipeline that went into it. So here it is. OK, so that's a little teaser of the project. So what is BBC School Report? It gives 11 to 18-year-old students in the UK the chance to get involved into making their own news reports. So around March every year, there is a great big news day. And months earlier, there's mentors from the BBC get involved. They get signed up with a school of their choice. And they go and speak to students, and just to give them a little bit of an insight what it's like to work within a news environment, and just to give them a bit of a help with their own kind of news reporting and just kind of get them started. A few months earlier, I designed a whole load of stings, and they were designed to go on a broadcast, and so on social media as well. So they worked really, really well, and I did some animated GIFs, which were used quite a lot on Twitter and Instagram. And it was basically just a displacement on a cube, and I just rendered it out with a bit of cell shading and so on, and it worked really well, and it was quite graphic, very clean and very bold. So it was decided when the news day comes along to maintain that end design and then create a sequence that was long enough to work as a sequence for a title sequence. So the brief was to design a title sequence to run across multi-platforms from on-screen broadcast, website, and social media. So this sequence went out on the BBC Red Button service. It went out on the BBC News channel in an evening special. It was also available for schools to cut within their packages to top and tail their own sequences. And then what I did was animate some animated GIFs of each particular shot. So they ended up on Twitter, and the end shot is used quite a lot on Twitter. My inspiration, I was inspired by a lot of things, but I think my biggest inspiration was WALL-E, Pixar's WALL-E. And in particular, I really like the robot characters within the film. And apart from the fact that I really like the rendering, that kind of hyper-real look and feel, I really like the way they had their individual component kind of jobs. Like Emmo was always busy sweeping up the floors, making everything clean. Bernie just was like the DIY character, burning and fixing things. But what I liked about these characters, apart from the fact they weren't the kind of, obviously, the main characters, I like the fact that they came together. Even though they had their own individual specialisms, they came together to deliver, or to help Eva and WALL-E get out of the situation towards the end of the film. And I quite like that, and that inspired me, apart from the fact that I really like that rendering quality. So the concept was, like I say, it was inspired by the collaborative efforts of the robot characters within the film WALL-E. And while I was never, ever going to have a budget of WALL-E or anything like that, I wanted that kind of look and feel of the film. I wanted to put the microphone brand into a process of manufacture. So you had all these component parts which are all coming together, and they give you the finished product, and then here's the microphone, it's over to you, go and make the news. And then I wanted to compare it to a production team who work with their own skill set. So you've got your producers, you've got your researchers, you've got your editors, and so on and so on. And they all work individually, and they all come together, and you've got a final program. And that's the comparison I wanted to make. In regards to the kind of look and feel of it, I rendered it out in Arnold because I wanted that kind of hyper-real look. But Cinema 4D was obviously my main tool. And while I didn't have that kind of budget, I modeled everything from scratch within Cinema 4D. That kept the budget, obviously, down because I didn't have to buy any assets. So I rendered it in Arnold. And I really like the way it works so seamlessly, the way it works together within cinema. I really like that. I did all the compositing. I rendered out depth pass. Did it all in After Effects. I used Frischlift for my depth of field, and Real Smart for the motion blur. mostly for time, really. And I wanted, because it had to appeal to a very young audience, so I graded it out using Red Giant's Magic Bullet, because I wanted that Instagram feel. I wanted that Instagram look and feel that would appeal to a young audience, you know, and I wanted each frame to look like it had come out of Instagram. So, you know, kind of oversaturated vignettes and everything. So I was really pleased with that in the end. But you've got to start from the beginning. So if you're going to build a microphone up, you need one to pull apart. So I built the microphone from scratch. And because I was pulling it apart, I needed an interior of the microphone. So I did lots of research on condenser microphones, but I didn't want the kind of ugly kind of gubbins of an interior kind of microphone with wires and soldering and so on. I wanted it quite clean and quite minimal, but enough to say that is an interior of a condenser microphone. So once I had my exterior and interior, obviously, the mesh, I had to do it in a particular way, because when you look at that, that's pretty high density. And when you've got microphones which are on cloners and there's 20 or 30 of them, that's quite a lot. So it's going to slightly chug your machine a little bit. So you've got to find I had to find a different way of doing that, because I didn't want to use the geometry. So I had to convert it into material. So we just go up a little bit closer. So there's my metal material. But naturally, when you wrap material onto a sphere, you're going to get a lot of distortion. And if you look at a sphere, I mean, everyone knows what a sphere looks like. If you look at the geometry, it pinches at the top and it pinches at the bottom. So if you wrap anything around a sphere, you're not going to get that balanced geometry out, no matter how much you try. You need to convert that into quads. You'll get that. If you literally just put that texture onto that spherical geometry, you would get that. And we want that. We want to convert it into quads. So the way around that is you've got to do a little bit of kind of simple dynamics. I mean, the whole project's got lots of dynamics and not overcomplicated dynamics. So you've got a sphere, which is a collider. You've got a hemisphere, which is also a collider, and the plane, which has a soft body dynamics. And imagine a little bit, it's like vacuum forming something, where you've got a shape, and you've got a bit of plastic, and it molds that plastic around that shape. And then the top section just reinforces that shape. And then you have that shape. But it's quads now, because obviously our plane is all quads geometry. So just to show you that process, you just go to your outer sphere and you add a collider body tag. You go to your inner sphere. The inner sphere is the hemisphere up the top. And you add a collider body tag as well to that. And then you go to the plane, and you add a soft body dynamics to it. OK, so when you're working with dynamics, you cache your dynamics. So you know, that way you can scrub it along the timeline, and you can play things back. So now baking it. And then once you've baked it, you can play it. And it will play like that. So you've got the shape, and then you've got the shape on top, which reinforces that shape. OK? So now you've got almost like an injection molded shape of that sphere. So when you remove the sphere and the hemisphere at the top, you've got that shape. Now, if you make that shape editable, that plane will go back flat again, and that's not what you want to do. I found the best way I could get it back in was to export it as a single frame, as an alembic, and then re-import it back as a mesh. And then once I did that, I was able to make that shape editable. And all I did was add a cube, put it into a Boolean, and then I had a clean cut of that shape. And that was my microphones. And the microphone shot looked like that. I think it works quite well. I mean, you can't tell that it's a piece of material, a texture, rather than geometry. And I've had people ask me if it was texture or geometry. So that's kind of, I think, a good sign. The injection molding machine, I did lots and lots of research, and I watched lots and lots of YouTube videos of what an injection molding machine does, and I got really quite interested in them. And for me to understand how an injection molding machine works was to build a really, really simple structure of one. So I built this and added some kind of dynamics within it. And it really helped me to kind of color code each section. So when I did build the final one, it was just kind of easy to do that. So if I hit play, so there you go. You got a cube in there, which has got dynamics. There's our mold. And I added a little cube. Because what I did, sorry, a sphere. What I did was, this is just a front projection of it. There's a dynamic sphere. And as this cube pulls back out, there's a little sphere which taps onto that cube, and that cube falls. And it works on collision. So it's triggered on collision. So all I did was I timed that sphere to the BBC News music. So by doing that, I was able to get the dynamics happening every single time in exactly the same place. If I just play that. Now, you won't be able to see that because it's really quite small, so I'm going to zoom it up for you. There you go. And just see, it's just subtle enough of a tap, but enough to trigger that collision. There you go. So it's just a little subtle tap, but that worked. Now, in terms of the design of the injection molding machine, like I said, I looked at loads of manufacturers and kind of got an idea of it. So I built this. And then you've got the kind of hydraulic section, which is the hopper shot, which that was the more tricky shot to work on, I think. So I kind of built around it. So I kept some elements of the original design within there and just built around it. And then added the kind of hopper section on the other side. So that was the end camera shot. So you could see here, there's another dynamics happening here. I put it in a dynamics conveyor belt. And again, that was really, really simple. So if we look at how a dynamics conveyor belt works, you start off, I just added a plane. And I find it quite helpful when you're animating dynamics and you've got an object taking it away. Things like adding a checkerboard is really quite useful because it gives you an idea if you need to add more friction or take away some friction or add more bounce or whatever within your dynamics. So I started off with a plane and added a checkerboard. And then just added a cube, just to kind of emulate the BBC School Report cube. I've just added some rounded edges as well, just so it gives you a similar bounce. Now, for it to work, you put a rigid body tag onto the cube and a collider body onto the plane. And then I just animated it along the Z axis and then just cranked up the friction so it just takes it away. And that's exactly how the conveyor belt worked. So you've got dynamics which are triggered with a little sphere, and they fall down, and then you've got another set of dynamics, which is the conveyor belt, which takes that cube away. Now, the hopper shot, It worked in exactly the same way. And I built this, again, I did lots of research, and I found that, I started off with a different design, and that didn't work. So I thought, you're not going to see the little pellets falling down. That's really important. So kind of artistic license, I kind of made it into a kind of glassy plastic perspex material. But I added with some cloners, I had a grid of cloners, which we've added a rigid body dynamics tag to them, and this had a collider body tag on the hopper. So once all the pellets kind of fell and relaxed, I then froze those dynamics, so they started in that position. And then I just added a dynamics plate underneath. And I animated that to the music as well, so it's falling down. And then I put a bit of pre-roll, so it went up for 5 frames, and then went back down, further down. Because I wanted to kind of emulate that kind of suction that you get when things go down a hopper. They kind of slightly bounce back up again before going further down. They slightly bounce up again. So when I hit play, there's that slight kickback. And that's exactly how the hopper shot worked. Just a couple of colliders and a collider body tag, rigid body tag, and some cloners. And it was just simple as that, just time to music. The mic assembly. The mic assembly, again, very simple. Just like a radial cloner, just goes round and round. And I had like hemispheres, because I wanted them, obviously, to form to build the microphone head. So I added a plane effector, and it just split them apart, but it put them back together again. And I knew that I was never going to render the back section of the mic assembly, because I was only going to look at the front of it. So it looks like they're forming together, and then they go off. So that's how the mic assembly head worked. And just to move it forward, the design then became this. It's not playing. OK. Let's see what's happened here. There you go. I don't know what happened there. So you've got this kind of plane splitting them up, plane effector splitting them up, but they form together again. And by this point, I'd also created this kind of little sucker attachment that puts them together, and I added the microphones within there as well. And then the final design of the mic assembly was that. Like I say, you can't see the back of it. So it forms together, and it just goes off. But you just don't know where they're going. They could be going further back in Z space. The robot, I didn't want the robot design. I didn't want the robot to be, obviously, the star of the sequence, because it wasn't about the robot, even though it was the robot that was kind of helping to put it all together as well. It was the microphone and the brand of School Report. But the original designs, of it was very different. So if you look at, this was the original robotic arm that I created, and it had a different head attachment to it. It had this kind of claw head. And it wasn't right, really, for the sequence, because it's quite an aggressive attachment, and it's got claws, and then there's kind of logistics. Well, it can't really pick up the cube, because it'd have to go really quite wide. And if it was picking up the kind of microphone chrome, it could scratch it. And I thought, that's not going to work, even though it kind of looks quite nice as it is as a thing. As a robot, it wouldn't work for BBC School Report. So I had a kind of bit of a think, and I thought it was best to create something which had kind of a plunger, and it was more versatile to create a plunger head because then you can pick it up. It was like all these little suction pads. You can pick it up, move it around, and so on, whereas the claw would just be too snappy and like I say, too aggressive. And this was simply built with a cloner. The suction pads were built with a cloner. And I just added a kind of delay effector just to add that kind of little kickback, that little bounce. And that worked really, really well. The final design of the robot was this one. And that's with the new head attachment put in. And also, I wanted the kind of, rather than it being kind of the arm being kind of as it was before, when it was too long, I've kind of tilted its head down because it made it also quite softer. And I just thought it would be more appropriate, really. And I decreased the base size as well, because I didn't need anything too clunky and big. Increased the size of the hydraulic cables as well, just to make them, you know, kind of a bit more meaty. And that worked. That worked in the end. I was really quite pleased with that. I mean, going back to the kind of displacer, again, very, very simple. That's just a cube. When you're adding anything with displacement, depending on how much detail you want, always increase your segments. I mean, this is just for demonstration purposes, and I've just added 4 in this one. And then, okay. And then just added the displacer into the cube, and then chose noise, and just cranked up the height. And that was kind of animated to the music as well. But what I also did, because the sequence had a living hold, I just added a random effector and a delay effector, just to give it that subtle kind of constant movement, but very, very subtle. And this is the final sequence. So that's BBC School Report. Thank you. How long did I work on it? I worked on it for quite a while, but I think if I had to take in total time, it's probably about 4 to 6 weeks. So I was also learning Arnold as well, and I had a very kind of quiet time, so it gave me that time to learn like Arnold and get my head around it. All rendered in Arnold. Yeah. But what I did was, with the end shot, because I'd rendered the first stings earlier, I'd rendered them in the standard renderer. I didn't even use physical, because I wanted that kind of cleanness. So what I did was, with this sequence, I kept the end section rendered the same. So everything was Arnold, apart from the end section, just so they all matched together. And just did a kind of composite on that afterwards.
Why did you choose Arnold as opposed to any other renderer?
Partly because I've had it for a while, and I've wanted to get my head around it, and I really love the stuff.
So you do that in the middle of a project?
Yeah. And I wanted to get my head around it. And also, I love the stuff that's coming out of Arnold. I really love that hyperreal look and feel. And I just thought it would be appropriate to do in that, you know. And I think it worked. I mean, looking back at it, I probably would have maybe tried different things. But I was really quite pleased that I kind of learned it on the job and got something like that I was quite pleased with. So thank you. Thank you very much. Cheers. So.